1995. Survivor's name is Marion Ballaban. Name at birth is Ballaban, 1L. Interviewer's name, Debbie Portnoy. We're interviewing in Huntington Station, New York. The country is United States of America. The language is English. My name is Debbie Portnoy, Debbiportnoy. Today's date is September 10th, 1995. I'm conducting an interview with Mr. Marion Ballaban. The interview is being conducted in Huntington Station, New York, United States of America. Please tell me your name.
My name is Marion Ballaban, and now it's Christopher Marion Ballaban.
Can you spell that for me?
Last name B-A-L-L-A-B-A-N, and my father spelled his name single L, B-A-L-A-B-A-N, and Marian is M-A-R-I-A-N.
Did you have any other name?
No.
Did you have a Hebrew name?
Emmanuel.
What country were you born in?
I was born in Borisov, Poland in 1923.
And how old are you right now?
I'm 72 and a half.
What's your birth date?
My birthday is January 28, 1923.
Can you spell the name of the town that you were born in?
Yes, Borisov, B like Barbara, O-R-Y, S like Samuel, L-A-W.
Tell me a little bit about the town that you grew up in before the war, what your grandparents were like, your parents.
Borisov was actually a very important industrial town in Poland because it was the center of the Polish oil industry. It had about 40,000 people, give or take a few thousand, of which I would think about 1/3 were Jewish people. My grandparents on my mother's side came, and as a matter of my great-grandparents also from my mother's side came from Brody, which used to be, before the First World War, a border town between between Russia and Austria-Hungary. My grandparents were born there, and then my great-grandparents were born there and lived there, and my grandfather was born there, and my mother and all her siblings were born there. My grandparents on my father's side, my grandfather actually was born in Odessa. My great-grandfather was from Radziwiłł, which was in I think Belarus or Ukraine, and then he moved to Odessa, which is in Crimean Peninsula, and my grandfather then from Odessa, my great-grandfather, went to Odessa, and then he moved to Lvov, I think, and my grandfather lived in Lvov, in Lemberg, in Lvov.
Tell me a little bit about your parents. What were they like?
My father was a wonderful man, and I adored my parents, and I adored my father. He was working in the Polish oil company called Petrolea, which was a part of the biggest oil company in Poland, was called Małopolska. He was not a religious man. He was very, I would call westernized, very Polonized person. Had a tremendous sense of humor, and he was a very, very popular man, and he was very much respected in the town. My mother came from a much more religious background. My mother was rather religious. She came from also from a large family. She was a housewife. My mother was extremely active in Jewish charities in Borisov. As a matter of fact, she and another man were really carrying on their shoulders one of the Jewish orphanage house, which was across the street almost from our house, and she was very active. She used to spend practically every day in the charity, raising funds, taking care of the children there, supervising the school which was there, arranging for funds when the children grew up and were ready to go to the school, to the high school, arranging for funds. She was very, very active in this thing.
Did it have a special name, the organization?
I don't remember. It had it. I don't know. It was orphan. I have no recollection. I know it was on ulica Wojciechowska, because our house was on the ulica Wojciechowska, and the orphanage was on the other side, very close to the Jewish cemetery, the old Jewish cemetery there on ulica Wojciechowska. But I don't remember the name. There were several Jewish orphanages there, because the town had a very substantial Jewish population, some of which were people who were professional, who were working in the various oil companies, had a very wealthy Jewish population, but also had a tremendous poverty. And there were a lot of very, very poor Jews living in the town.
Can you describe the religious background in your home?
Well, my father was not a religious man at all. My father used to go to the quote services for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The only time I can recall he was going there. He was not a religious man. He had a brother who lived in Lvov. He was not a religious man. He had 3 sisters. And he had another brother, and I didn't know him too well, and I don't think he was religious. He had one sister who was married to a Polish man. They lived in the same hometown that I did in Borisov. He had another sister, Anna, whose husband died, and her son was baptized upon the birth when he was born. Adam was his name, because his father at that time said, and this was in 1922, that for Jews there is no room for Jews in Poland. Either you change your religion or you leave the Poland, because it's going to be from bad to worse. So he was not religious at all. My mother was from a religious home. My grandfather, her father, was a very religious man, but I was brought totally, I took classes in religion because they were compulsory in high school. You had to take classes in religion, but I used to go with my father for high holidays to the temple for a couple of hours, and I was bar mitzvah.
Do you know the name of the temple?
There was no name really. The temple which we were going wasn't really a temple. It was across the street, I told you, there's an orphanage. During the high holidays, they would turn one room or 2 rooms into the temple, into the synagogue. It was just temporary arrangement, and they would have a Torah, I guess, and something. There were a lot of Jews praying there, but it was not a regular temple. There was one temple in the town, in the center of the town, and I don't remember the name, where I used to go together with the rest of the high school Jewish kids. Whenever there was some sort of a national holiday, like Independence Day, Constitution Day, birthday of the Polish president, we would gather in the high school. Then the Polish kids would go to the service of the church, and Jewish kids would march to the synagogue. It was a regular synagogue. I don't remember the name. And we would have services there. Then we would go back to the high school, and then we would take part in the parade, in the whatever, military parade, and we would be part of the parade. High school children, bands, and soldiers, and what have you.
Tell me a little bit about your schooling. The first type of school you went to.
Yeah,
and
well, I went to when I was 5 years old, I went to the first grade, because I was the youngest. I was born in 1923, so I really started schooling very early, and I went to the public elementary school for 4 years. I went to 2 schools. Then at the end, there was one high school in Borisov. It was private high school. It was not a public, it was private. I went there, and it was mixed school. It was a Polish kids, and I would say Jewish children were about 40%, between 30 to 40% of the high school. It was a very good school. There were several teachers who were professors who were Jewish. There was a Professor Adler who was teaching French. There was Professor, and he was killed, I understand, viciously, terribly. He died terrible death during the Holocaust. There was a German Professor Morgenstern, who I understand survived the war. There was a Professor Tillman who was teaching mathematics, and he survived the war, and I met him in Israel, in Haifa, in Israel. And there was another woman, Professor Jewish, I forgot her name, and she was teaching, I think, geography, and the rest of the professors, as far as I recall, were Polish. It was a good school. There was no special anti-Semitism. I don't recall any specific. I can recall only one specific act of anti-Semitism by one professor, and it was immediately clamped down by a Professor Schmidt. Stanley Schmidt, Stanislaw, who I was very fond of. And there was...
What did he do?
Well, what happened was that the professor of history, Professor Dudek, asked one girl to write a lecture on the cause for the fall of Poland in 18th century. And she wrote this lecture and her explanation why Poland fell and was divided between Russia and Germany and Austro-Hungary at the end of 18th century was because Jews were selling vodka to Polacks, and Polacks were getting drunk, and as a result of Polacks getting drunk, Jews conspired to have the Poland divided. I mean, it was the most ridiculous lecture you can ever imagine, and it was papers and everything was prepared by the professor. His name was Professor Dudek. He was teaching history. It was horribly anti-Jewish lecture. And I remember I stood up, and I told at the end of the lecture that the people who should be most offended by these things are not Jews, but Poles, because it was the terrible condemnation of the stupidity of Poles. And I told them that I will prepare another lecture to show what are the historical reasons why the Poland actually fell. And after the class, I went to Professor Schmidt and I told him what happened. And Schmidt called the class together. He blasted this girl. Her name was Irena Tabaczynska. She's still alive in Poland. And he told her he would not allow the class to be divided, that everybody in this class is Polish. Some of them are Poles of the Roman Catholic religion. Some of us are Poles of the Jewish religion, but they're all Poles. And they're all citizens of Poland. He also, went to the Professor Dudek and gave him hell. As a result of this lecture, the girl Irena Tabaczynska was taken out of a high school and sent for 1 year away to another high school in Lvov. Her mother called my parents and apologized for that, told her that this is not something she is teaching her children at home. And I then received a number of calls from Jewish people in the town, and they all helped me to prepare the lecture to show what were the real historical reasons why Poland fell and was divided at the end of the 18th century. So this was one incident which happened in the town.
What year was that?
That must have been in, I would say, about 1936, around 1936, I think. It was very interesting because it was that incident was sponsored by Professor Dudek, and it was tremendously condemned by Professor Schmidt.
And Professor Schmidt, was he Jewish?
No, he was Polish, and I believe I heard later on. Professor Schmidt had a very special relationship with me. I was his favorite student, long before the war. I was his best student. When the war started, he recruited me into the Polish underground. We were arrested together. We met in the first time we were arrested. We met in a Soviet NKVD station, police station. He came in when I was being taken out after interrogation, and I was bleeding, and he came to me and said, "Don't worry, everything will be all right." Then we were together in prison in Drohobych, and then I had a once...
I just want to go back a little, back to school before we get further along.
Yeah.
Did you ever have any anti-Semitic experiences outside of the school before the war?
No, I didn't have anything. Let me explain to you. My father had a very respected position in the town. He worked in a firm where there were a number of Jewish people in the higher positions. There were a lot of Polish workers. I lived in a neighborhood that was Polish Jewish. I had a lot of Polish friends. I have never had any. I had maybe once or twice. Oh yes, there was one incident which was anti-Jewish, but it was very specific. In 1935, the Boy Scouts movement started in Borisław. They were starting the first group of Boy Scouts. They took only Polish kids. Jews were not accepted. So Jewish parents protested. And then my father received a call and that I have been accepted to join the Boy Scouts. I was the only Jew accepted to the Boy Scouts, which we refused and I did not go. I think it was 1936. So instead of joining Boy Scouts, a group of Jewish parents organized, and they organized for the Jewish boys maybe 10 of us, a group of training. We started to take fencing and jiu-jitsu, and that was being done to replace for us what Boy Scout movement to which we are not allowed. So that was one act of anti-Semitism which came sort of officially from high school.
Did you, the name of the organization, this new group that they started for you, did it have a name?
No, it was just run, there was a Jewish community house in Borisov, Dom Żydowski, Jewish community house, and at that place, a group of Jewish parents, including my father, Mr. Goldstein, whose son survived, etc., engaged a man, and his name, I forgot his name, I think was a Jewish man, I think Mr. Loventhal. He supposedly, before the First World War, was one of the top fanciers, you know, in a fencing, and he did it as a without pay. He started to conduct classes in fencing, and about 10 of us were there. Then,
what other types of sports were you involved in?
Well, I was involved in soccer, which was mixed, Jewish kids and Polish kids. I was in a track and in tennis. As a matter of fact, in 1938 we had a tennis tournament for our high school, and I won singles and I won doubles championship. In doubles I played with Mark Ashkenazi, a very close friend of mine. We won doubles and I won singles, and I got a picture even at the end of the tournament. They took a picture of all of us, and I was very active in skiing.
Were any of your family members ever in the Army or Army veterans?
In my family, my uncle, my father served in the Austrian-Hungarian Army during the First World War, and I think he was a sergeant or something. And my uncle, his younger brother, was an officer in the Polish Army. I remember he was lieutenant. I remember him coming sometimes once or twice. I met him. He was in the Polish uniform after the war. He was a lieutenant. And also, oh yes, my mother's brother, Dr. Leon Katzner, who lived in Lvov. He was one of the first legionnaires who joined when Joseph Piłsudski, Marshal Piłsudski, started the Polish legions to start fighting for the Polish independence. I think he organized his legion in Krakow, I believe. My uncle Leon was one of the first people who joined his legions. So after the war, as a legionnaire, he had a certain benefit, etc., which were not available for average Poles, but only for people who were legionnaires. Also, my uncle Królikowski, who married my father's sister, Czesława, who survived, and I met her in 1988. He was also what we call legionnaire, member of the legions.
Did the fact that they had been in the Polish Army affect their circumstances during World War II?
None whatsoever. Well, my uncle Leon Katzner didn't do him any good because Germans couldn't care less. My uncle survived because he lived on Aryan papers. And the other uncle, he was Polish, he was a Pole, Królikowski. So during the war, he was a Pole, so he was not persecuted.
What did you know about Nazism?
Well, in 1930s, when Hitler came to power, it started to become worse and worse because the Polish anti-Semitism, the radical Polish Nazi, pseudo-Nazi, I would call them, were growing stronger and stronger, very badly. While in Borisov, I was not affected. However, every day, going towards later part of 1930s, you read in the newspapers, in a Jewish paper, Polish Jewish paper, Chwila, Lwowska, it was called, every day, incidents of anti-Semitism. Eventually, my sister, for instance, she was studying in 1938, she graduated, in 1938, she graduated from high school, she went to study, 1937, I think. She couldn't get at first to the university because she was Jewish. Polish universities, and there were very few of them. There were several medical schools and engineering schools, etc. They all adopted eventually what they called either numerus nullus or numerus clausus. Numerus nullus meant no Jews were accepted. Numerus clausus meant that they would accept 1 or 2 Jews per class. Medical schools had numerus nullus, no Jews were accepted. Engineering schools had numerus nullus, no Jews were accepted. And my sister got eventually to the in 1937, I think, she got to the commercial school, commerce school or economic school in Lvov, because through my father connection. So she was one of 2 Jewish students accepted there. Then in 1938, she moved to the university in Krakow to study French literature, and again, they had the numerous clauses. They were accepted like 1 or 2 Jewish students. My sister told me that they had to sit in a separate bench at the back. They were not allowed to sit in any place they wanted. There was one bench in the back of the room in the class where Jewish students were allowed, and there was always a fear of beating. And my sister saw a Jewish student attacked, and I think they almost cut his fingers. It was really a fear to study in Polish universities.
What happened to your family and to yourself after September of 1939?
Well, after September 1939, when the war started, within a few days, when it became obvious that Germany is overrunning Poland, my family, my parents, my 2 aunts, etc., with the son and husband, we loaded two coach, you would say, wagons, and we ran away from the town together with thousands of other refugees, and we are going to go to Lvov because we thought we would be safer there.
What did you take in the wagons with you?
We just took some food, some bread, we took pillows and blankets, and we took silver. That's all.
Was the silver any items of significance, or was it just monetary?
Family silvers. My mother loaded. I have no idea, but I know that my mother was loading silver, and she took blankets and pillowcases, that sort of thing. So we have something, in the wagon. That's all. And some very little food was available, but we took some bread with us, some bread, sugar, and we left. We had 2 wagons. It was my father. Was in one my father, my mother, Lucia, and my sister and I were on one. On the other one was my aunt Anja, together with her son Adam, who was my age, and Uncle Królikowski, this Polish man, and his wife Cesia. So we left 8 of us in 2 wagons. We ran for 2 days. Then at the end of the 2nd day, and we were driving only during the night, because during the day German planes were all over. They were strafing and machine gunning everybody. And the end of the 2nd day, I think, we found out that Soviet Union attacked from east, and they crossed over from the east. So on the 3rd day, I think, 3rd or 4th day, we turned around and we came back to Borisov.
What date was that approximately?
Within the first 10, 12 days of the war. Well, maybe September 10, 11, 12. We called back to Borisov, and we found out the Germans were already there. A German stayed in my hometown in Borisov for about 5 or 6 days. Then, as a result of the Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement, that part of Poland was given to Russians. So Germans left. And
how did the Germans treat you when they were
We stayed at home. We stayed at home. We didn't move out.
Did you hear or see anything?
Nothing. We had a Polish maid, Fila, and Fila would go down, try to buy some bread, but there was really nothing to buy. And we stayed at home. Germans never came to our house. We never left. We stayed in the house. At the end of about 5 days, we heard through Fila that she heard that Russians are coming. So I decided to take a chance, and I left the house, and I walked from the house. I went toward the main street, toward the main center of the town, and while I was walking, I saw Russians. Germans were gone.
And then what happened?
Well, Russians came, and when the Russians came, I think next day, some Russian officers moved to our house, and they took several rooms, and they were there temporarily. Then the Russians told us that we are bourgeois, we cannot live in the house by ourselves. They told us, they kicked out my uncle, Polish uncle, and his wife out, so they came to move to our house. They took 1 room. Then the Russians gave another family. They kicked out another family, so they took the other part of the house. So we were left actually our bedroom and a den and a kitchen and a bathroom. Bathroom was for everybody, for everybody. There was only 1 bathroom in the house. And The Russians didn't bother us at first, except there was shortage of everything. There was shortage of food. You had to stand in the line before you could buy bread. I was started to go back to school. The school was becoming run by communists. There were a lot of children. My high school. High school kids turned to be that they were communists, or they were at least welcoming Russians, and they were Jewish kids because the life under Poland was so tough for them, and there was no chance really in those days to. Once you were a Jew in Poland by 1938-39, your future was closed. You could, unless you had a lot of money and you could leave Poland to go abroad to study, you could not really move out of the country. Your future was closed. And with Hitler surrounding Poland, Czechoslovakia was gone, Austria was gone. The only thing left to emigrate was to go to school was England or Switzerland. You couldn't go to United States. There was no, United States was taking nobody.
We're going to change the tape now, Mr. Ballaban.
Yeah, okay.
Portnoy. Today's date is September 10th, 1995. I am conducting an interview with Mr. Marion Ballaban. The interview is being conducted in Huntington Station, New York, United States of America. Mr. Ballaban, you were just beginning to tell us about your experiences with when the Russians invaded, but I think there was another story that you wanted to go over.
Yes, when we were coming back, when we decided that the Russians are coming from the east, we better go home, we started to travel, and toward the end of the day, we are coming toward Drohobych, which was one town a little north of Borisov. Before we reached the town, we met the first German troops. As a matter of fact, they were on motorcycles. German troops stopped us. They were very polite, and my cousin Adam and my cousin Adam spoke fluent German. I didn't speak a word of German, nothing, because I took French. And we walked with this one soldier, and a German officer told my parents, there were several, maybe 100 refugees, maybe 150 on wagons, that he will give us an escort in order to get to Drohobych so that we will not be arrested for breaking the curfew. We got to Drohobych. The escort told us we can stay in a park because as curfew hours. We went to sleep in the wagons. There were several dozen people there, and suddenly there was screaming and yelling, and some German police came, and they started to threaten us, and eventually they told us nobody can be in the park, we have to go to the town hall, which we went there. We got there, we were very tired, we were traveling all day, and German soldiers were there, and they told us to empty our pockets looking for weapons. We had no weapons, and one German officer came to me, and he was yelling to me in German, which I didn't speak, but at the end he said the word "Verstehen Sie?" And I knew enough German to understand him. Do you understand? And I say, "Nein, sprechen wir Deutsche." At which point he took it for an insult, that I insulted apparently German army. He started to scream, and he took the gun. At which point there was another German, apparently senior officer, and he grabbed him by the hand, and he pushed him away, and he told my father, my father was standing to me, he says, "Is that your son?" My father told me, he said, "Yes." I says, "Well," he said, "right now your son is safe, but better make sure that tomorrow morning your son will go out very fast, because this man, who in time left, is going to shoot him." So we all went to sleep in a town, in one big center room in a town hall, and we were very worried what this guy is going to do to me next day. So we decided, when we were leaving the place early in the morning, they dressed me, my mother dressed me as a girl. She gave me some women clothes, and so I had a skirt and a blouse, and they put some bonnet on my head, and then I walked away surrounded by other women. And we got on our wagon, and we went back home. The German never found me. But I got a taste of Germans, and I never forgot it, because I decided one day, if I have a gun, I'm going to show them that I can be just as heroic with a gun as he is heroic with a gun. So,
tell me about once the Russians came, what happened to you?
When Russians came, soon after, I changed the religion. I changed the religion because I consider myself, I was planning to change the religion before the war, because as a Jew I could not see any future in Poland. I couldn't study. I wanted to study medicine, and we are thinking about I was thinking about changing religion, but I didn't. When Russians came, I decided to change the religion as a sort of sign of identity with the Polish cause. I love Poland. I was very patriotic. I grew up on Polish literature, on Polish heroic tales. I really felt myself to be a Pole, and I love Poland. So I changed the religion to identify myself with Poland. Soon after, I was recruited by Professor Schmidt. He called me to his house one day from the school. He taught me to work with him home. He told me that there is a organization being formed right now, whether I like to join this organization. It's a patriotic organization. It's a resistance movement, and he is organizing some students, and whether I would like to join it. I agreed to it. I joined it. I was taken by Professor Schmidt to another place, to a Captain Stetz, who was apparently higher up on this level of organization of this resistance movement. He told me at that time that I have to recruit 4 other people. We will be organized in a group of 5. I will know four people who will be reporting to me, and I will be his personal courier, that I will be getting from him papers, and it will be my job to carry various envelopes and letters, etc., and several other tasks which I was given. And one task was to count and identify movement of Russian Soviet troops in my hometown. And another one was to distribute pamphlets in movies, houses, on the street, etc., which would sort of keep up the spirit of the people. And I got this pamphlet, and I was active in this thing. I organized a group of 4. I took 4 other people into my group. 3 of them were eventually arrested together with me. 2 of them were arrested before me. And then, maybe couple weeks after I organized this group, we were taken to in the afternoon. Professor Schmidt and 4 of us went to a private apartment of a man who was apparently also high up in this organization, and there we swore to the secrecy on a cross. There was a big crucifix in the room, and we swore that we are going to keep our, secrets at the Holschmir.
What was the man's name?
The name of this man I don't remember, but he turned to be, he was in Ukraine. He was not Ukraine, he was a Russian. Not a Russian, Russian. He was Russian. And he was actually working for the Soviet police. He was the one who turned our names to the Soviet NKVD, to the Soviet police. And we were all arrested soon after. I was arrested twice. First time I was released. And he gave our names. And everything which we are doing, he was reporting to the Russians.
What year was it that you first...
1940.
So when you first joined the resistance?
When I joined the organization, must have been at the end of October, early October, beginning of November. And
what were the names of the other recruits that you got into the organization? The other recruits
was Zygmunt Kowak, who survived and he's now in Poland. Klimek Romer, Kowak was a little older than I was, maybe a year. Klimek Romer, who was the son of the high school principal. The third one was Jerzek Andrzejewski, I think. He survived the war and he came back to Poland, and he met my parents. As a matter of fact, I used to come to visit my parents after the war. Klimek Romek died he was sent to the camp in Odessa, and he died from typhoid. And the fourth one was a fellow of the name Bujek, who after we were arrested, he decided he's not going to wait until they pick him up. He ran away, and I understand he crossed to the Hungarian border, and I met him in Iraq in the army. He went from Hungary, he managed to get to Middle East, and he joined the Polish army, and I met him in Iraq one evening when I went to the local movie.
Did they know that you were Jewish?
Yes, of course they knew.
And did they ever tell the other organization members that you were Jewish?
No, everybody in the town knew I was Jewish, but you see, I changed the religion. In their eyes, I was a Pole. Because I changed the religion, and when I changed the religion, it was very good to be a Jew. It was very bad to be a Pole. Russians, as Soviets, were favoring Jews over Poles. So by changing religion, it was an act of patriotism. And I was very patriotic Pole. Not only I, my father was very patriotic, and myself, we all were very patriotic Poles. We really loved Poland.
Did your father know that you had joined the resistance?
Well, very interesting question. One day I received a call, and it must have been about 10 o'clock in the evening, telephone call, and I was asked to go to a certain place, and that party told me that they know, some people know about my activities, and they asked me to come to the movie, to meet somebody in the movie house. I don't know the purpose. I went there, and I stayed there about 1 hour. Nobody showed up. I came back.
How were you to know who this person was? Did
That
you know a
person
name?
was going to approach me. In other, I didn't know the person, that person. I have no idea who it was. It was a woman, by the way, not a man. It was a woman voice. In addition, I would get sometimes a telephone call at maybe 11 o'clock at night, and I would tell my parents, I have to leave the house. And I would leave the house. Most of the time, I would receive the call from Captain Stetz, and I would go to his place, which was like 40 minutes walking. It was across fields, wide fields, a totally different part of the town, and actually very few houses. And I would get from him some envelopes. And then I was told next day I would take a train and I would go to Drohobych usually, and I would meet somebody in some other place and deliver the envelopes. So my father knew I was going somewhere. But on that specific night when I received the call, I came back from the movie house, and it must have been midnight, and my father told me, listen, he said, I know you are involved in something. He said, you're old enough to know what you're doing. But do you know what you're doing? And I said, that I know very well. I know exactly. So my father said, be careful. He said, but you're old enough. And he said, I have to respect your decision. So my father knew I was involved.
How old were you at this point?
I was 16.
Were you ever arrested?
I was arrested first time I was arrested must have been in January or in February in 1940. I was kept 1 day and I was released. And then I was arrested second time in March 7, 1940.
Why do you think you were released the first time? What happened at that time?
I have no idea.
Did they interrogate you?
They interrogated me, but there was no beating, there was no force. They told me basically a lot of things. They told me they know that you people think that there is a Polish army being formed. We know that you are waiting for a Polish army to come from Hungary, and you are foolish. And they told the guy who was talking to me, said, we know everything about you. I left. I was released about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I did not go straight home. I went to warn a man, and this boy Bujak, who was recruited by me in the evening. And oh, by the way, 2 other guys were already arrested. Klimek, Romek, and Jędrzej were already arrested. But we heard that they were arrested because they said something bad about Russia. We didn't know why. I went to warn Bujak and told him that not to come to the school the same day because he may be arrested. He wasn't in the school. I went to his house. I knew where he lived. And I told him about it. Say he's never going back to school. He plans to leave the town. So I went back home. By that time it was maybe 4 o'clock. My parents were absolutely in a state of, breakdown almost. And I told my father that, well, they really arrested me. I don't know why. And I said, I'm thinking maybe I should leave the town. So my father said, well, maybe you should think about it. And he said, let us think where you can go. And then some or other they left me alone for maybe 2 weeks. And then I was arrested on March 7. Must have been about close to maybe midnight when knock on the door. I was asleep already. I was sleeping my parents were sleeping in a bedroom, and next to it was a den, and I was sleeping on one bed, and on the other side was my sister. So my parents went to our maid went to open the door, and Russian police came and Kabudo officers. And they came in and they told me to get up. They searched the whole house. I was in a state of panic inside me because I had a gun, which I kept, however, hidden we had a big garden outside, and I kept the gun hidden in like a garden house, you know how you call it, you know, where you sit in a garden. And I also had a leaflet, anti-Russian Soviet leaflets, which, however, I kept in the attic. I took a step from the steps, took a plank from the steps, stuffed it inside and covered it. So I was only worried that they would try to look at whether they would find my gun and the leaflet, but they didn't. And they searched, they didn't find anything else. And then must have been about 1 o'clock, they told me, get dressed and you come with us. And I was taken to the prison in Borislav. And I was kept in the prison there. At about 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock, they took me for interrogation the first time. They beat me up. And then they brought me back to the room. And I waited, and in the same afternoon, they put me and many other people who were arrested, maybe 15 other people on a truck, and we went to prison in Drohobych. And my prison career started there in Borisov, Drohobych.
Do you know who beat you? Do you know the names of these people?
No, they were NKVD. All I know is uniform NKVD.
And then what happened to you in prison?
Well, once in prison, I was in prison in Drohobych, and they started interrogation. My first interrogator was when I arrived the same day to the prison. There were maybe 15 people, and then we stayed in one big gathering hall, and they were bringing other prisoners. They were bringing every so often a truck would come. Eventually, there must have been about 100 people there, men and women, mostly men, but there must have been about 30 women. Among the women was a woman, a Polish woman, whose daughter was going with me to the same class, and I knew her very well. Must have been about 9 o'clock in the evening. They told us to undress, stark naked, everybody, men and women. Women went to the other side, men on the other, and they searched us, bodily searched everything. And then they started to take us from the cell.
Did you see any abuse to the women separate than the men at this point?
Just a body search, no. Just a body search. I didn't say any abuse. And then, but we really didn't look, to be very frank with you. I mean, everybody was very embarrassed to be stark naked, and we just didn't look. But I didn't hear any screaming. Didn't hear anything. Then, maybe 10 o'clock in the evening, 10:30, they took me upstairs. I think it was on the 3rd floor, to the interrogation room. And there was a man, and I came there, I waited, and then a man came, and he told me, his name is Vladimir. And he told me, I am your interrogating officer, and I want you to make me a statement. And I want you to know all day long there was no food, no water, no nothing. We were kept all day since we left, Borisov, nothing.
How did you take care of your bodily needs if you had to use the
Well,
bathroom?
they would allow us to the bathroom occasionally. And I presume if you had to go, they would allow you. But I don't think I went to the bathroom. In the morning in Borisov, when I was sitting in a room, it wasn't a prison, it was like in a room. I think it was a trade school which was converted into prison. When I wanted to go to the bathroom, there was a militiaman who would take me to the bathroom. Once they took us from that place, I don't remember. I really don't remember. I presume they allowed us. But once I went upstairs to this interrogation, and Vladimir came, eventually, he told me he's my interrogating officer. He said, listen, he said, you're better off telling me everything you know, because if you don't tell me voluntarily, they're going to beat you up, and you're going to say it anyway. But, and then I remember as we are sitting, by that time it's maybe 11 o'clock, I'm hungry and I'm thirsty. The door opens and a woman comes and bringing Vladimir, she brought him some sandwiches and something to drink. So Vladimir told me, he said, this is my wife, he told me, and I don't know whether he was lying or not, but he said, my wife. I said, I tell you what, if you tell me everything now, I will give you some food. I said, I have nothing to say. So anyway, he ordered and they brought me something to drink. They brought me I think some tea or something. And then must have been at 2 o'clock in the night, he let me go. And he kept asking me, and I kept saying, I have no idea what you're talking about.
What were some of the questions he asked you?
Whether I belong to an organization and what we plan to do and who are my friends, all sorts of questions. I kept saying, I don't belong to any organization. I know nothing, you know, what you want. And I was acting stupid. And he wasn't, by the way, he was very decent about it. He told me that you beat me up, but he didn't touch me. Didn't touch me. And he was a very decent guy, by the way, I found that later on. I mean, he was my interrogator for several weeks. And he threatened, but he never did anything to me. He didn't do anything. And then at about 2 o'clock in the morning, he ordered some guard and they brought me to the cell. My first cell, it was cell number 7. It was in the basement. And I came in, the door opened there. There was a one bulb shining. And I could see in that darkness several beds. They were all double beds and there were people sleeping apparently. And as I walked in, and they took my belt. So my pants were falling down and I'm holding my pants like this. And a man comes, and his name I still remember was Olcek. He says to me, "Oh, you're a new one." I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you have a cigarette?" I said, "Yes, I have a cigarette," because my father gave me cigarettes and I was taking. So he took a cigarette. We went to the corner. There was a toilet there. He sat on the toilet. He had a cigarette and we smoked together. Then he says to me, "I tell you what," he said, "there are 2 people sleeping." There were 2. He said, "There's no more beds available, but I will have a 2-bed joined together. You can sleep between us." So we joined 2 beds. He woke up another guy. We pushed 2 beds together, I lying in the middle. And Olcek taught me, he said, "I will tell you one important thing. I'm not going to ask you why you're here. Never tell anybody why you're in prison, because you don't know who is the informant." He said, "Never discuss what is your problem. Never." He said, "Never ask this question." So I woke up in the morning, and people in the prison with me were 2 or 3 people from my hometown, the rest from other cities. There was a man who was a director of a high school from Drohobych, several other people, and we never discussed what we are in for. We sat there day after day. From time to time they call you interrogation. They usually would call you in the night, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock when you're asleep. And then my Vladimir would ask me questions, and I kept saying nothing. But other people started to come, and the beating started at that point. And there was one man who everybody was afraid of him. Everybody, sooner or later, when you were in prison there, you would know that this guy was very cruel. We used to call him Lalka, a doll, because he always smelled from. Excuse me. We used to call him Mademoiselle Fifi, and I don't know whether you know the Guy de Maupassant short story, which is called Mademoiselle Fifi, and we used to call him. He must have been putting on himself women perfumes, because he was immaculately dressed. He was always clean shaved. He was a good-looking man, maybe 5'8", 5'9", and a sadist from the word go. And eventually, sooner or later, if he got you, you were in bad shape. So he got me a couple of times, and the first time when he started to beat me up, Vladimir came, and he tried to protect me as much as he could. So,
how did he try? And what
well,
did he
he
do?
would push and say, don't do it. He said, he's going to talk anyway. He tried. And Vladimir tried. Then they would call, say, at a meeting, they arrested Stats. And one day, my story was eventually, oh yes, and I was lucky, they arrested also Zygmunt Kobak, this fellow whom I brought into the organization, and the other 2 people. The other 2 were arrested before, but they were sitting in a cell next to us. And Zygmunt Kobak was brought into my cell. And I remember he was brought in maybe 10 days later. My story, which I was repeating, was we didn't belong to any secret organization, that we were taking, because there was witnesses, they had supposedly that we are seen with Professor Schmidt and 3 or 4 of us, and my story that we were taking private lessons of Polish history because the Russians stopped teaching Polish history. So my story was that we never belonged to any secret organization, that we are gathering together for the purpose of studying Polish history and Polish literature. That was the whole purpose of our meeting together. So when Zygmunt came to my cell, I told Zygmunt, I said, when they ask you interrogate, that is the story. What I'm saying is. So he said, all right, he was saying the same story. Then one day they called me and Kobak, Zygmunt, upstairs, and they brought Captain Stats. And that man was so beaten up that I couldn't believe it. He was He was one bloody part, and they brought him only because he then testified that he recruited us, and I was his courier. And I said, I don't recognize this man, I really don't know anything about it, and I didn't admit I knew him. Then they brought me in confrontation with Professor Schmidt, and again, Schmidt was saying that he never organized me, and I was saying that this is my professor who was teaching me Polish history, and that is all we knew, and we just decided not to, that was our story. However, they had all this information from this guy who was an informant. So at a certain point, I got called by Vladimir again, and Vladimir said, listen, I wrote the whole confession for you. Eventually, you're going to sign it. I said, they will beat you up and beat you up, just sign it. Do you want to know what it is? I said, I don't want to know. I will sign anything you want. And we signed this confession. Kobach signed the confession. And in July, we had a trial. Prior to the trial, about a day before the trial...
Why did you sign it at that point?
Because they were beating me up. And I have no idea what we signed. And they knew everything which we did, they knew. They knew they told me the day when we swore on the cross. They knew everything. So basically I signed the confession that I belong to an organization. Oh, and we were tried. They read me, I was tried on the paragraph, I think 54, 2 and 10 and 11. I was accused of being a member of the anti-Soviet organization, attempting to overthrow Soviet government by arms, and by being a spy for the foreign powers. So at a certain point, everybody was. I mean, you couldn't not sign eventually. You really didn't care, because sooner or later they would get it from you. It was a question whether they will get it out of you when you're almost dead, or you're still in some form of a human shape. So I told Vladimir, I don't care what, I don't want any more beating, and I will sign it. So Kobach, we agreed with Kobach, we are going to sign. We went to, and we decided we are going to deny it at the trial. So before the trial, I was called downstairs to the administration office. There was a man sitting there whom I knew before the war. He was a lawyer. And he told me that he was engaged my father to represent me and there were 2 lawyers, to represent me and 3 other boys, including Kobach and Romer, etc. And he told me, listen, he said, I don't know what you're accused, and I don't want to know. When we come to the court, we are going to ask for mercy on the grounds you're young, you're a kid. So I said, all right. We come to the trial. Next day, they took me to the court. I went with Kobach, with Romek, and with this 4th one, Ježek. While walking to the prison, they took us separately. While walking to the prison, I saw my father standing. The street was closed. There were soldiers were standing closing the street. I saw my father on the side. I walked to the court. Now there are 4 of us together. We were tried by the war tribunal, which was 3 judges. 3 judges sitting there, and they were sitting at the one table, and a prosecutor is sitting on the other side, and what is his name? Prosecutor, I don't know his name, and then the court stenographer and our lawyers, 2 lawyers. The judge, the main judge asked us a question. He said, this is the confession, and I said, this confession is totally phony because I have no idea what I signed. We were beaten by NKVD, by the officers, and people who were sitting there were a couple of NKVD officers, no public, of course. And I said, anything I signed, I was beaten by the police. I had no choice. I have no idea what I signed. And all other 3 guys said the same thing. So the judge said, you really deserve to be beaten because in Soviet Union, our law does not allow to beat up prisoners. So you're lying. That was his answer. So
what was your sentence?
I got 10 years. Kobach, I think, got 7, and 2 other guys got 6. And the trial lasted most of the day. Then, well, put it this way, the trial was stopped at about, I don't know, noon, 1
o'clock. We're going to
o'clock.
change the tape now, Mr. Ballaban. Okay. Today's date is September 10th, 1995. I am conducting an interview with Mr. Marion Ballaban. The interview is being conducted in Huntington Station, New York, United States of America. Mr. Ballaban, you were telling us what happened to you after your sentence.
Okay, when I was sentenced, eventually they took me from one prison to another. I went from a prison in Drohobych to Sambor. I went from Sambor to Lvov, and I went to Kharkov. In Kharkov, and I was, being transported with other people there. And in Kharkov, toward the end of January, they took us eventually on a transport to the concentration camps. We went up north via Moscow, Kirov, Kotvas, going toward Ukhta. And we arrived there, it was toward the end of January or early February.
What year was this?
It was in 1941. And must have been the end of January. We traveled by 2 weeks in winter from Kharkov to the final station on the Moscow-Ukhta railroad line in terrible conditions. There was no heat. We were in cattle wagons, in covered wagons. It was freezing cold. We never got a hot meal once even. We are getting every 2-3 days a slice of a portion of bread. There was no water. Everything was frozen. They used to bring us occasionally a bucket of snow. We would try to melt it. And everybody was getting, most of the people in the transport, a great deal were Russian criminals. So they were, very afraid because they were really very vicious. Some of them were vicious criminals. They were taking everything which we had. We got to the final stop in Ukhta, or near Ukhta, and then the train stopped. We got out in the morning. We waited most of the day. Then they told us we have to walk to a camp, and we started in a blizzard. Russians told us that the guard, that if you fall behind the last guard, they will shoot you dead. So you try to keep the distance between you and the last guard behind you. There must have been maybe 700-800 people, maybe 1,000, I don't know. We marched and we marched and we marched in a blizzard. Then the snow stopped. I heard shots. This is apparently guards were shooting people who couldn't walk anymore. We walked most of the night. Must have been 2-3 o'clock at night where I couldn't walk anymore. Maybe 10 other people. We just stopped. We decided just to lie there on the snow and just stop it. This was the end. And lucky for us, a truck came. Russians had a couple of trucks which were picking up people who couldn't walk apparently. And a truck came. We managed to get on the truck. They brought us to a camp. That was a temporary camp. We spent the night there. And that was my first stroke of good luck. Was I had on me a sweater which was made, skiing sweater, which was made for me by my mother in better days. And one Russian prisoner there who was apparently official in this camp told me that if he will give me this, he will give me a pencil, he will give me a paper and an envelope and a stamp. So I will be able to write to my parents where I am once I get to the permanent camp, and in exchange he told me to give him the sweater. And I did it because he said, if you don't, somebody else will take it from you anyway. You might just as well get something for this thing. So he gave me this piece of paper and a pencil and an envelope and a stamp, and I gave him a sweater. He also gave me some bread and some soup. And when I arrived, next day they took us to another camp. We traveled for 2 days. We arrived to another camp. And I wrote a letter to my parents with my address where I am. I was in a gulag, and I don't know the number. That place was described, that section of Russia was described by Solzhenitsyn, by Gulag Archipelago, Archipelago Gulag. That was the place where we were. Hundreds and hundreds of working camps, labor camps. I was in that camp with some other Polish friends of mine whom I met in the prison together, and we were there, and we were really dying. Every day was war. There was no food. We were starving. We had a diarrhea. My weight went down to maybe 80-some pounds, and eventually I was in several camps, and eventually, lucky for us, Polish government, Soviets were attacked by Russians. Soviets were attacked by Germans. The war started between Germany and Soviet Union. Polish Prime Minister Sikorski, who at that time headed the Polish government in exile in London, went to Moscow, and as a result of this meeting, Soviets agreed, Stalin agreed to create a Polish army in Soviet Union. And
did you ever get a number while in the camps? Did you have an identification number?
No, we didn't have any identification. Nothing.
Did you ever have any other contact with your family? Were they able to write you?
When I arrived to camp, I got a first package I got from my parents even before I came to the camp was when I was in prison in Kharkov. My parents were able to keep it. They knew somehow or other. They found out that I was in Kharkov. But then when I got to the concentration camp, I told you I got a letter, I got the stamp and a pencil and a stamp, and I sent a letter to my parents. And sometime in June, before the war started between Soviet and Germany, I got the first package from my parents which reached me in that camp. And I remember, among other things, my parents sent me cigarettes and some sugar, and my mother sent me a silk nightgown, hand-embroidered nightgown, and some underwear. I traded the silk embroidered nightgown and my underwear with some Russian gangsters there who were powerful, and I traded for a protection. And I also shared this food with one Russian who was also prisoner, but he had a very high position. He used to be a personal friend of Lenin during the time when they were starting the revolution. He was a big shot in the Communist Party, and he was purged by Stalin in the 1930s. And
what was his name?
I don't remember his name. He was a very decent guy. He was a big, powerful man. He was one of the sailors when the Soviet revolution started on a Soviet ship in the port in Leningrad port. I think it's called, I forgot the name, Kronstadt, where the revolution started. He was one of the sailors on that ship. And he was purged in 1930s by Stalin. And because if you had anything in a camp, lived in a barrack, gangsters would just take it from you. They would come and they would clap you to death. So I gave him whatever I got from my parents. There was some sugar and some other food, and I gave it to him, and I asked him to keep it in his barrack. And every day I and my Polish friends, 2 or 3 other Polish friends that I was close by, we would come and he would give us our package, we would take some sugar or whatever, and he would keep it for us. I shared it also with him, of course. So then, after the war started between Soviet and Germany, we were taken to several other camps, and eventually in one camp we were told that Polish citizens are going to be freed, and we don't have to work anymore, except if we want to eat, so we have to work. And I eventually was released, and we got a...
What type of work did you do during the labor camps?
When I came, we were cutting the trees, a lumberjack. We were cutting the trees. We are going, every morning, we would get up at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and 5:30 we would go to work. You were cutting the trees in winter. It was terrible work. People were dying left and right. The only food, your portion of food you were getting depended how much you produced. Most of us couldn't produce much. You were getting in the morning the pensak, which is a barley, like 2 spoons of barley, and a bread, which was roughly like 400 like a 1/4 pound of bread. And you weren't going to work. The work would be, you go in the snow up to here. You're going 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 miles. You were watched by guards. They had police dogs. If you tried to escape, they would shoot you dead. Then you usually would work about 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, come back to the camp, and you would get a barley soup and another 2, 3 spoons of barley. That was the only food. Every day you were touching guy on your left and right, where we slept on several levels, there's like a ground on the floor, then the first level of the, what we call, I forgot the name, how you call it, just layers, like...
bunk beds?
Bunk beds, right. There's not beds, just, yes, bank levels, and you touch who died, because every day people were dying. People were starving. Russians had no food. They were not starving us because they wanted to. There was no food. And every day you touch the guy, is he alive? Is he dead? If somebody was dead, you called the guard and they take him out and they put it on a wagon and they buried them.
Did you have any outer clothing to wear? Did they supply you with any coats?
They didn't supply that, no clothing. Eventually, I had a pair of pants, which I traded. It was my skiing pants, which I wore, and then I got a shirt. I traded for some shirt, and I had no shoes. So instead of shoes, you were covering your feet with the rocks. And then the Russians would give us, eventually, they had like boots made, what we thought were made from the old car tires. They were very bad. They were just because they would cut your feet here, in the back of your foot, and that is all you had. We are freezing to death. We are basically naked, and we are starving to death. But the Russians had nothing to give to us. They were not doing it on purpose, I must tell you. They just had nothing. And the mortality rate was incredible.
Tell me about your release. What happened then?
Well, one day they called us. They separated Polish prisoners from the rest of the prisoners. And we came from work, and they separated, told all the Polish prisoners, gather yourself. We went to another barrack, and the guy was a prison commandant, camp commandant comes, and he said, Polish citizens, you are free people.
What was his name?
I don't know, I have no idea.
What year was this?
That was the year 1941.
And the approximate date?
It was in around September, end of September, early October. I would say around September.
What was your reaction when he said
We all started to sing, every one of us, Polish national anthem. We just broke, there were several hundred of us, maybe 200-300. We broke in the Polish national anthem. And then next morning we were allowed to go. However, they told us, if you work, you get food. If you don't work, you get no food. I decided I will not work for them anymore. I left the camp in the morning, and I went into the woods, and I picked up, I had 2 buckets, metal buckets, and I went into the woods far up, several miles into the virgin woods, virgin forest. I picked up buckets of blueberries and some mushrooms. And I came back, and I traded my blueberries. I went to the barracks where guard families were living, and some women there, some Russian women, gave me some soup and bread, and I gave them blueberries. I brought mushrooms to my camp, and the guy there told me, some Russians said, don't eat them, they're all poisonous, so I threw them away. And every day, until we are really let go, I used to go into the woods, and I would pick up blueberries, and then there was one Russian woman who had 1 or 2 kids, and I would come and I would give her blueberries, she would give me some food, and I used to sometimes babysit for her. She had to go some shopping, and I never stole anything from her, and I lived there maybe in that place 10 days, 2 weeks. Then they took us to another place, and then one morning they called us, say, you are going to be taken on a train. And this was like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. You have to undress and leave all your clothing here because you are going to get new clothing. So we undressed. We are 200-300 people, stark naked, sitting. It must have been October already, and it started to snow and sleet and hail. And we are sitting there all day, stark naked, under this hail and storm, and nothing's happening. Then by 7, 8 o'clock, we realized the Russians have nothing to give to us. The Russians came back, said, well, pick up your old clothes, we'll do it tomorrow. So we picked up whatever schmata you could get and ran back to the barracks, where we spent the rest of the night. And next morning, they did it again, except they didn't promise a new clothing. And we got on a train. We marched to the train station. There were some railroad cars, open cars, and they took us. We traveled for about 3 or 4 days, going to somewhere. I didn't know where. We stopped by the river, a big river. I don't know the name of the river. I think it was I forgot the name. And Russians said, now you're on your own. They just left hundreds of people in the middle of nowhere. There I met this one young boy who was arrested with me together, Ježek. I met him. And I remember we went to the village a few miles away and we stole a chicken. Came back, and then nobody knew what to do. Some Poles decided to go, to continue traveling, looking for some place, and I couldn't take it anymore. I mean, Russians, meantime, some other Russians came, they were looking for workers. And they told us if we go to work for them, they will provide us with the food and clothing and everything. So I signed up with some group. I told them I will go and work, and I went on a ship, on a river boat. I traveled to Syktyvkar, which is the capital of the Komi, Autonomous Republic of Komi. We traveled 6 days. They gave me a loaf of bread before we started, like 1 pound, and no food for the next 6 days, except I found one raw potato and I ate a raw potato. There was no food. There was several dozen people on this boat. And I got to Syktyvkar. It was a long story. I went to work again to another camp. I came back and I spent the winter in Syktyvkar. And on March 7, 1942, I already heard about the Polish army, and I left Syktyvkar. And I left Syktyvkar and I decided to go back to the place where originally I came from to look for the train station. And it was another miracle because I left in a snowstorm. I walked all day. I found another woman who was a Russian woman who was walking to her working camp. We walked together through the woods. I had no idea where I was going. I knew I was going toward the train station. I didn't know where it was. And next morning, I left the camp and I came by the river. Must have been minus 15, 20 degrees below zero. Incredible cold, just vastness of the snow and the river, nothing there. I never realized that I would have to walk about 150 miles on that river in the Russian wilderness, that I would freeze to death probably within a few hours, if I could last few hours. And lucky for me, there was a truck which stopped by 3 Russians were going to that place, and they allowed me to sit on the top of the truck, and we traveled all day, and I got to another village, and from that village
What was the name of the village?
I think the village was, I think it was Chibiu. I think it was Chibiu. I think it was Chibiu. I will not swear to it.
Do you know what date we're at now?
What date we are now? It was like, I tell you exactly when it was. I left March 7, March 8, must have been March 9, because I traveled only 2 days. I walked 1 day, which was March 7. March 8, I found that March 8 I got to that place. And there were several other dozens of other Poles who were also looking to get down to find the Polish army. And I found one Jewish man there who had a very interesting story. He was the one Jew who fought in a place in Westerplatte, which was the last Polish fortress which fell in 1939. And he really was from Palestine, but he was a Polish citizen, and he came with his wife to Poland before the war because his wife had some rare eye disease. So he came looking for a doctor in Poznań, and he was caught in the war, and he was drafted to the Polish army.
What was his name?
I don't know. I don't remember.
And then what happened?
Well, then from that place I started my travel. We went to Kotwas, and I found out that the Polish army was supposed to be in Buzłok. There was a group of Poles being organized to travel to the army. At that point they discovered, I joined that group, and somebody told them I'm a Jew. And the fact that I was in a Polish underground, that I was in Russian prison, meant nothing. The man in charge of this group told me, we don't take Jews to the Polish army, get lost. Well,
So up until now there was never an answer?
No, because nobody knew. Somebody must have recognized me that I'm a Jew, and they told me I'm a Jew, and the men in charge of this group, there were like 150, 200 people who were supposed to travel to the army. He told me, get lost. This was in Kotwas. So I kept away from them, but I knew I had to stick to the group because I didn't know where the Polish army. Soviet Union is a very big country. I had no idea where to look for it. So I traveled not with the group, but separate from the group most of the time, and I got to the army eventually at the same time they did. But I traveled separately. It took me from March until July. And when I get finally, and he put a hits on me. He wanted me to be thrown from the trains. He wanted them to throw me out of the train, to beat me up. And I fought back.
What was his name?
I don't remember. He was a lieutenant. He was a little short, miserable bastard. And I don't remember his name. Petrovsky or something. Could have been, I think, Petrovsky. But I will not swear to it.
How did you fight back?
Well, number one, he took my important document, which I had, which stated I'm a Polish citizen. He managed he took it on the pretext that he will provide me with bread every day. And he took it and said, no bread and you get lost. So I told him I will kill him. So there was another, I said, if you don't give me back my document, I will kill you. Because I have nothing to lose anymore. So there was another man who was traveling with the group, and he was a doctor, I think, and I think he was Jewish. He was a very decent guy. So he saw me, and he saw me that I was going to kill this guy Petrovsky, no question about this, because I was going to get my documents, and if the only way to get, he carried these documents with him, I was going to kill him. So he told me I will get the document. He got me back the document. And then I hired...
How do you think he got it back if the other man didn't want to release it?
He told him that I will kill him. He told him that he's going to kill you. I had nothing to lose. Without this document, I was dead. That was my passport, to get out of Russia. Then several times, some people that he told to attack me, and I fought back. I remember once I was traveling, and this was a big train, and we are going through the Russia south and east, going towards Asia. And I was in a car, in a open flat car, and there was it loaded with coal, and two hoodlums came after me, and I remember throwing coal, pieces of coal, so they ran away. Then I hired another Pole, a peasant, and I told him, listen, these people are trying to kill me, and I will provide you with food, but I need protection at night, because when I fall asleep, So he helped me. He was together with me, and I used to provide food. I used to steal. We would get at some stops, and I would go and steal. And somewhere I was smart. I managed always to get something to... We had no money. I had no money, but I always managed to do something to get some food. And I was feeding him. I was helping him. So he was my watchdog.
What was his name?
I don't remember. It's a Polish peasant. I don't remember. And then there was one guy who specifically tried to get rid of me, and he attacked me a couple of times, and I always carried a club with me, and somebody would try to fight me, I had a club in my hand. I was ready to fight. And then the funny thing was, eventually I got to the Polish army, and then a few weeks later, we are now in Iraq, and one in the Polish army, we all go to the services in Sunday morning, mass. And I am now in the uniform. They were taking no Jews, of course, and I got into the army.
How did they know that you were not Jewish? What happened then?
Well, that was when I got to the place in Yangayul, where they were recruiting. We got to Yangayul, from Tashkent to Yangayul. We get off the stop, and I'm now traveling with the same group of Poles. I'm not part of them, but I'm traveling the same train. And no tickets, of course. And we get off, and there is a Polish officer standing there telling them, there is no more Polish army here. You must go further south. He told us the name. There they will check you, and the commission will take you to the Polish army. So we jumped on the train, and somebody stole my little wallet I had with my document. That was my lifeline. And somebody stole it. That was the only proof I had. I'm a Polish citizen. Didn't say Jew. Said I'm a Polish citizen. We are there. We stayed 2 days. Then we go to the commission. They told us to go to the commission. We go to the commission, and the men. We go through the medical. They couldn't care less if you are dead. So long as you are a Pole, they take you to the army. Then they told us to take our clothes, and you are going to go after medical. You go to the one room, and there are several people sitting there, and they ask you, give your document. Prove your citizenship. And I'm standing there, and I remember I'm a Jew, I'm circumcised, so I'm standing stark naked, but like this. And I said, I don't have a document, and I told them what happened. So the man there says, there's nothing we can do about it. We cannot take you without this document because Russians don't allow it. And there was a man standing nearby, a Polish officer, who listens to the story. And he listened. I told him, listen, I am Krzysztof Ballaban. He says to me, and I'm a Pole, he says to me, let me talk to you. And he says to me, where are you from? I said, I'm from Borisov. He said, what was your father's name? I said, my father's name was Ballaban, Rubin Ballaban. What he was doing, I said he was a procuring in Petrolea. Said, if I met your father, I don't know, in 1937 in vacation, where would be? I said, you would meet him in Krynica and he would stay in Lviv Grudy. This was a hotel my father always stayed. So he turns around and said, I will be his witness. I knew his father very well. Now, he was a Polish officer. He knew my father was Jewish. Because before the war, he knew my father. And he said, I am a personal friend of his father, and I will guarantee for him. So they tell me, oh, this is wonderful. We need another witness. So he tells them, no problem. He has a cousin, doctor, I think Adam Ballaban. He's in a Polish hospital, which was in the village nearby. It was a Uzbeki village. He said, his cousin is there, and I will contact his cousin. Or they say, if he's Adam Ballaban, Dr. Ballaban is his relative, no problem. And I got into the Polish army. And once I got into the Polish army, we went then, accepted, and I was, they took me, I was taken into infantry, and few days, like 2 days later on, the remnant of the Polish army, there was just few hundred left. We got on a train, we traveled 3 days from that place to Krasnovodsk on the Caspian Sea, and they loaded us on a ship called Ivan Kaganovich. There were hundreds and hundreds of people, and we went to Pahlavi in Iran. And that once we were in Iran, from Iran we went to Iraq. We stayed in Iraq for over a year in Kanakin, in Kirkuk. Then we went...
What were you doing in Iraq? What was going on over that last year?
Well, they were training us. Actually, they were just... First of all, the first few months was getting us back into health, because we were violent. Everybody was very sick. I had a jaundice, hepatitis, I had a malaria, I had a boils, you name it, and I had it. So the first few months, British were just giving us food, and then they organized it into units. And I was in the transport company. With they teaching us, I got a driver class. I learned how to drive trucks, and we are getting ready.
What year is this?
That was in 1943, the end of 42, 43.
Okay, then, we're going to change the tape now.
Okay. Can I be excused for a second?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
th, 1995. I am conducting an interview with Mr. Marion Ballaban. The interview is being conducted in Huntington Station, New York, United States of America. Mr. Ballaban, you had mentioned that you had gone from Iraq, joined the British Army, and you're now further on. At any point, did you have any contact with your family?
No, I didn't have. During the war, I had no contact. I didn't know where they were. I remember once I tried to write a letter to my parents, because there was a Polish newspaper, army paper, say, if you want to write a letter to your relatives or send packages, you have to do it through an address in Portugal. So I sent the money, which I was being paid in the army, and I sent to this address in Portugal. And years later, and when I met my parents in Israel in 1959, my mother says to me, strange thing happened. One day we got a package. They were still in the hometown. We got a package from Portugal. It was sardines. This must have been the money which I sent. This is the only contact. I had no idea where they were. We knew that Poland was overrun. We knew Germans were there, but I had no contact whatsoever. My first contact was with my family after the end of the war. What happened was, from Iraq, I went to Palestine. From Palestine, we went with the Polish army. I volunteered to join the Polish tank brigade, which happened, I think, when I was still in Iraq. Then we went to Egypt, Palestine, Egypt, and then Italy, and I took part in the Italian campaign as a part of the Second Polish Corps. And then
which campaign was that?
This was Italian campaign. We were there the first was Adriatic. The first part of the campaign was Monte Cassino Piedimonte campaign. where the Second Polish Corps was fighting. And then they moved us on Adriatic side, Pesara, Ancona, Loreto, and Bologna. And this was the end of the war in 1945.
Did you see any action?
Yeah, I saw the action. I was in the signal company, and I saw the action during the Piedimonte campaign, during Loreto, Ancona, and Castelfidardo. You know all these names are. And then I went to the officers' school. At the end of 1944, I was selected to join the Polish officers' school, which was in Matera. Then after that...
what country was that?
In Italy, in Matera. This was near Bari, in southern Italy. Then when I finished officers' school, this was in February 45, I think, I was sent back to my unit, and we took part. At that time was the closing stages of the campaign. I think it was Bologna. And as a matter of fact, I was one of the first soldiers who reached Bologna, because we heard I was attached to the General Rakowski command, and when we heard that Germans are retreating, me and a couple of other guys jumped on a truck, and we drove all the way to Bologna, and we are, I think, among the first maybe dozen Polish soldiers who entered Bologna, and it was very wonderful. But
describe that to me.
What?
Describe that scene to me. What happened when you got there?
We came to the Bologna, I think, from the east. Bologna has also towers. There are two towers, which is, I think, on the eastern part of the Bologna. We drove to you couldn't drive. Once we reached the tower, you couldn't drive, because there were thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Italians celebrating, and they already heard the Germans left the town. And so we had to stop the truck, and the Italians were carrying us on their arms from one place to another. And I remember there was a beautiful young Italian girl dressed in the Red Cross uniform. And I spoke pretty good Italian by the time. I was yelling to her, "Help," in Italian, "Help me, aiuto, aiuto, help me." So she tried to run to me, say, "What's the matter?" I said, "I saw you, I'm in love. My heart had been pierced, you know." So it was a wonderful scene. Then eventually we left this group, and we walked over the center of Bologna, and then we got some alcohol. We started, and then we met American troops who a couple of hours later came from the west. And there were a group of Americans, maybe 10, and they had drinks. And I remember we started a party. Some Americans, they had some food, and we sat in the middle of the streets, in the street intersection, and I got loaded. I don't remember anything more, but somebody found me there, and then I woke up in a truck, in a Polish truck, and I came back to my unit.
What date was that?
I don't remember, I tell you exactly. It was in summer of 1945. It was the first day when when the first troops entered Bologna. It was in 1945.
And then what happened?
And soon after the war was over, soon after we stopped there, and soon after the Germans surrendered in Milan. And I remember, they were interesting. When we heard the war is ended, I wanted to get to Milan, because everybody wanted to go to Milan. So I and 3 other guys, we took a jeep and we drove to Milan. And when we were passing by, there were Germans all over the place. They were moving around. They had no idea what was going on. And the bridge on the River Po was, I think, destroyed. But by that time, American and English engineering troops put a pontoon bridge. So we drove to the bridge, and I got to Milan. Once in Milan, near the cathedral, there was like a shopping arcade, and I walk into the arcade, and I see a man running to me, a civilian, and I had my uniform, Polish uniform with letters Poland, and he cries to me in Polish. He said, "You are Polish troops?" In Polish. I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh my God," and I looked at him and said, "You are Jewish?" He said, "Yes, I'm Jewish." I said, "Well, I'm Jewish too." He said, "Oh my God," he said, "we've been hiding. We are all hiding here from Germans. We have been hidden by Italians. And the first soldier I meet is a Jewish man, a Jewish Polish soldier." So I said, "You wait here for a few minutes." So I waited, and he ran somewhere, and before you know, like 10 other Jews came, and they were hugging me. They were crying. They saw the first Jew in uniform. It was a very moving scene for me. And I don't know their names, you know. I wasn't interested in meeting Jews there. I was interested just exploring Milan. So then me and these other guys, we met again, and we spent a few hours, then we drove back to our unit. But that is, I never forget this sight of their screen. He said, my God, Germans are gone. The first, I'm meeting a Polish soldier. He was so, you know, to him, sitting and hiding, he's meeting a Polish soldier. Then after that...
How did you find out about your parents?
In December 22nd, or December 24th, December 24th, 1945, we were stationed in Macerata. I was a cadet officer, and I had a private room. I was renting private room from an Italian family, and I came back to my unit, to my room, because I was getting ready to go to the Christmas dinner at the officers' mess, which was, you know, the place where Polish officers and the cadet officers were eating. And as I'm there getting dressed, there is a knock on the door, and I open the door, and there is a caporal from my unit, a friend of mine, who comes, stands with a man and said, this man is looking for you. And I looked, this is my friend Dole Kliber, who was from my high school friend. Dole Kliber left Poland after the war. He survived in hiding. He left the war, and he told me he traveled. He was going to Palestine with a group of other people, among other Jewish people and a Jewish woman, Mrs. Spiglova. And he said, your parents survived. They were in Borisov. They left Borisov. He said, I don't know where they are. But Mrs. Spiglova, who is now in Rome, she may know where are your parents. So we went for dinner with him. I took him to the officer mess for dinner, Christmas Eve, which is a big Messiah in Poland, Christmas Eve dinner. Next day, I got a car and I drove to Rome to Mrs. Spiglova, because I got her address. And Mrs. Spiglova, whom I met, I got a picture when I'm in Rome walking to her apartment. Mrs. Spiglova recognized me, and she was so happy, and she told me that she has the address of my aunt, who lived, my mother's sister, who lived long before the war. She was married, she lived in Zurich, in Switzerland. And when she was leaving Poland, my mother gave her the address of this aunt of mine. So I wrote her a letter, right as soon as I came to my unit, to my aunt in Zurich. And I told her that I'm your nephew, and I survived the war. And she wrote to me immediately that my parents are already in Krakow. And through her, I started to correspond with my parents. That is when I found out that my parents are alive. I mean, through Liber, I knew that they're alive, and my sister are alive.
What had happened to your parents during the war?
My parents, soon after I was arrested, and when they started organized ghetto, my father kept my mother and my sister in the house, and he was working with the Polish committee, which was helping Polish refugees who came from the West. And he was not denounced for a long time because everybody knew him, and some or other, they knew I was arrested by Russians, and I became like a little town hero among Poles, so he was safe. One day they denounced him, and he was arrested by Gestapo and taken to Drohobycz, to prison, and a Polish priest, Usikowicz, who saved a lot of Jews and was very friendly with my father. And there was a German Volksdeutsch, who I think was a mayor of the town at that time. They went to Gestapo, and they told them they made a mistake, that Mr. Ballaban is Polish, and they let my father go. And my father came back home, and by that time, Kobak family, the same family that I recruited their son, the woman and her two daughters, took my parents into their house, and then my sister was with them and my parents, and then my sister took a man whose wife was killed and his son was killed, and they stayed in a closet, in a what we call spiżarka, for 2 years.
How big was the closet?
It was about, according to what the boy who was with them also, this Polish son, thought it was about 9 feet by 10 feet.
For 2 years?
For 2 years they lived there, and they stayed there during the day, and during the night they would open the door. You know, it was like a spiżarka. It was the door was covered, looked like a storage space, like a shelves. They would open it, and they would let my parents out. They would sleep on the floor. They stayed there for 2 years. There were some Polish people who knew about my parents, but nobody denounced them, and they survived the war there. My sister, my parents, and this man, Oleg Frenkel, who married my sister after the war, and they had a son. He died soon after from a heart attack, but they have a son who is now living in Haifa. And he's married. He has 2 boys.
What happened to you after Rome?
After Rome, with the Polish army, I left Rome. We went to England. I came to London. I got a scholarship. I went from the British government. I got a scholarship. I went to study at the University of London. I graduated in 1950, in July of 1950. And soon after I got a visa to come to the United States because I have 2 cousins here. And the American government under Truman administration allowed Polish ex-servicemen of the Free Polish Army to come to the United States outside of the regular Polish quota. So I came here in 1951, and
What have you been doing since 1951?
Well, I've been working for 1 year. I've been working practically all the time for banks. I started with Chemical Bank, then I went to Franklin National Bank. I was there a senior VP. Then when Franklin went out of business, I went to Bankers Trust. I retired from Bankers Trust in 1990. Then at the same time, I got a job offer of a Fleet Bank. I was an executive in Bankers Trust in Franklin, then in Fleet Bank, and I retired from Bankers Trust in 1990, and I retired from Fleet in 1994.
When you first arrived here, did you ever have any anti-Semitic experiences?
In America?
Yes.
I had a very bad one in Chemical Bank. Because when I joined Chemical Bank, soon after I was selected to join the executive training program. My name was Christopher Ballaban, and nobody thought that I'm a Jew, and I was not going advertising it. Gentleman's agreement, the story of the movie, until when I got married to my wife here, I went for my honeymoon really to Israel. At that time, my parents left Poland and went to Israel. And the branch manager, who was very friendly with me, who told me weeks before he put me for a promotion as a bank officer, he says to me, "Why do you go to Israel?" I said, "Well, my parents are living there now." He said, "How come?" I said, "You're not Jewish?" I say, "I'm Jewish." And I went to meet my parents. When I came back, I was called to the headquarters in Chemical Bank, and I was very politely told that they want me to resign because they didn't know I'm Jewish. And Chemical Bank does not like really Jews in the bank. And I must say that soon after, when the story became known in Chemical Bank, I was called to some office of the very high executive who told me this is not true. He wants me to take my resignation, and that his best friends are Jews, and I told him what he can do with his best friends, and I left Chemical Bank. And that was really the worst incident of anti-Semitism that I met, because the man high up, VP in the personnel department, tells me, "Chris," he said, "I don't feel this way, but some people in this bank don't like Jews. You are better off resigning."
March 7th seems to be a significant date for you.
Yes.
You had 2 very important episodes in your life that happened. And how do you celebrate that day?
How do I what? How do I say? My kids always laugh at me, say, "Dad, don't tell me it's March 7th again." I used to go, usually when I was working, I would go for lunch with other guys there. But everybody in my family says to me, "We are sick and tired of listening to your March 7th date." They don't want me to mention it. So I really don't celebrate.
Okay. What we're going to do now is introduce the family members and some of the artifacts.
Okay. Let me call. This is my grandchildren, Rubin, Ari, and Gavi, granddaughter. And this is my 2 granddaughters, Michelle, number 1, and Sarah, 3 years old.
Mr. Ballaban, why don't you introduce your family to me?
Okay, this is my wife, Carolyn, who is a saint by being married to me.
What year did you get married?
We got married in 1959, in June 21st.
Mr. Ballaban, why don't you introduce your family to me? Okay,
this is my wife, Carolyn. We are married in June 21, 1959, and I must say my wife brought me back into Judaism, because I told you I was nobody. My wife insisted of having a Jewish home, and she brought me back into Judaism, and she made sure my kids are growing up as Jews.
In what way do you express your Judaism today?
Well, I'm a Jew. It's difficult to say. I'm trying to be a good Jew. I belong to this temple. We brought our children in a Jewish tradition. We taught them more or less. You see, I always said my father was a very good Jew. My father was very charitable. My father always took care of the poor Jews, and he was not the only one of poor Jews in the town, although he was not religious. I'm not a religious Jew, don't get me wrong, but I think I'm a good Jew, and I'm very proud of being a Jew. And I think I got it from my wife, who happens to be very, very proud Jewish woman.
Tell me about your children.
I got a daughter, younger daughter Karen, who is what you are, pediatric neurologist, right? And she's apple of my eye. And she was born in 1962, am I correct? Right,
yes.
62. And she has two little girls. One gangster is 1 year old, and the other one is 3 years old. There's two sweet little girls. And I have a son, older son, who is a rabbi. Believe me or not, he's a rabbi. He's married to a rabbi. And my son Stephen was born in 1960. He went after college. He wanted to be a rabbi. He was influenced by a rabbi from our congregation. We were one of the 15 families which organized a Reconstructionist temple in Cold Spring Harbor in Huntington. Again, it was my wife who was instrumental in bringing me there. And my son, after graduation, went to the rabbinical school in Cincinnati, and he has 3 little children. He and his wife, both rabbi, were the first married couple serving as a married couple in the American Armed Forces in the Navy. They were both rabbis in the U.S. Navy in California, and he has 3 children.
What message do you want to give your children and grandchildren in the world 50 years after the Holocaust?
Well, the first message: never give up. I mean, when the things looks the worst, they may be something around the corner. Never give up. My life taught me many times. I never give up. I wanted to live. And if you want to live, if you don't give up, something will turn around. This is first message. Never. I think it was Yogi Berra, the baseball player, who said, "It's never over until it's over." That is number one. Number two is that love, family love and connection are extremely important. One reason I'm alive is that I got from my parents the strength and a family ties, which made me very, very, I would say, I wanted to live to see my parents. And I think it's very important that you must have a backbone in you which comes from the family life and family love. And a third message I have for my children and grandchildren: be very proud you are a Jew. Because in final analysis, you must be what you are. You cannot be anything else. You must be what you are and be very proud of it.
Mrs. Ballaban, would you like to add anything?
No, I think that says it all.
And your daughter, how do you think your father's war experiences affected the way you were raised?
I think it gave us a very strong sense of family, more so than people whose parents or a parent was not a survivor of the war. Sometimes it tends to cause even some overprotectiveness, but in the end it tends to give a very strong sense of family, which I think is very important. So I think that in that way it really affected us growing up.
On behalf of myself and the survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
It was
you.
my pleasure. It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Go ahead.
This is my paternal grandmother, Esther, and this picture must have been taken in 1920s, in the late 20s. She lived in Lvov and she died in Lvov.
What was her last name?
Her last name was Ballaban.
What was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Ballaban. Also, she was cousin of my grandfather, Ballaban. As a matter of fact, my grandfather, his last name was really Schwarzapfel. He changed his name to his cousin wife's name in order to get out of the being serving in the Russian army. This is my father, Rubin Ballaban. This picture must have been taken in 1920s when he was in Carlsbad in Czechoslovakia. He used to go there every year. Okay? This is my mother, Anna Ballaban. Her maiden name was Katzner, and this must have been taken before the war because her hair is not white. She got white hair during the war. This is a picture. My sister, Lucia Ballaban, who at that time is now, her name is Frankenthal, but she was at that time married to the man to her right, Alexander Frankel, and Lucia married Alec Frankel. They were together in the same hiding. Lucia, my sister, Alec Frankel, whose wife and a son were killed by Germans during the pogrom in Borisov, and next he was in hiding with my sister, and next to Alec is my mother, Anna Ballaban, who was also in the same hiding. Three of them were together. And next to my mother is my aunt Anja Klarfeld, who was being hidden by her brother-in-law Janek Królikowski. She was not with them in the same hiding. This picture was taken in 1948-49. If you move your hand, I will be able to see you. Taken in some resort place in near Zakopane, in a resort place in Poland in 1948-49, because he died in 1949.
And what was the name of the sister?
Was my sister?
Your sister's name?
My sister is Lucia Tugendhaft. But at that time she was married to, her name was Frankel. She was married to him, but he died and she remarried. Her name now is Tugendhaft.
Who's in this photo?
This photo is in my class in the first grade of high school. We must have been about 11 years old. It was a costume party, masquerade party. So I'm here and a lot of other children, Polish and Jewish. It was a, Polish and Jewish party, and my cousin is somewhere here also. And there are several other, there is another boy here, Goldstein, who is now living in Israel.
What year was this photo
This was taken, must have been taken in about 1934, 33, 34.
How did you come about having the picture?
This picture was, I think, Józef Goldstein, who is now in Haifa. He had this picture. He made a copy of the picture he had, and he sent it to me.
Which one is that?
He's further. I will have to look for him. If you move it to the row, bottom line and move to the right, I will be able to find him.
Yeah.
That's
No,
No, this is,
no. You have to
he
go.
wants to know which one's you, Daddy.
Me, this is me. But if you come here, he's sitting in front. You have to move your picture, and I will find him. Okay. This is him. This is Indian. The dress is Indian. This is Józef Goldstein, and he had this picture. His name is Nambatur, and he lives in Tel Aviv.
From left to right.
Yes,
Just like
okay.
yourself in
Yes,
the
I know. You tell me when, Carl. Okay, this is me on my left when I'm in the Polish army. This picture was taken in December 24th, 1945. And next to me is my friend Oleg Liber, who brought me the news after the war that my family survived the war. And we took a picture together. Yes, this is my picture. We went in 1937. We went to Vilno. The whole class went to Vilno to visit the place where the heart of the Polish Marshal Piłsudski was buried next to the grave of his mother. So this was my class in 1937, I think. And on this picture is Professor Stanisław Schmidt, who recruited me to the Polish underground. He was the one who in 1939 recruited me to the Polish army. He was killed by Russians. Next to him, in the uniform, is standing my cousin Adam Klarfeld, who was killed in the Polish Warsaw insurrection in 1944.
How did you come about having this photo?
Again, I got it from Józef Goldstein. Józef Goldstein had it, and he sent me a copy of that picture. This is my grandchildren, Rubin, Ari, and Gavi, granddaughter. And this is my two granddaughters, Michelle, number 1, and Sarah, 3 years old. This is my son, Rabbi Dr. Ballaban, at the naming of my granddaughter, Sarah. Those are the medals which I received for the service in the army. As well, there are some insignia which indicated that I was a member of the tank brigade.
Which army was this?
Polish, 2nd Polish Corps, a part of the 8th British Army. Okay. This is my picture when I graduated from the high school in Palestine, which was organized by the Polish army, so we received the certificate. I got it in February 1944. It was in Barbara, Palestine.
Okay.
This was a Red Cross passport I received when I lived in Rome in 1945, when I was thinking about emigrating to Venezuela. This is when I graduated, when I finished officer's school in Italy. We went to Rome, and we are under the balcony from which Mussolini said in 1939 the word Polonia è finita, that Poland is finished. So we had a picture to state that Poland is still in business. This is the certificate I got from the army, testifying that I served in the Polish army as a part of the 8th British, under British command. This is the certificate that I graduated from the Polish officer school in 1944.
Okay.
This is the document I received, travel documents, when I was in England and living for the United States, because I was stateless. So we received the document, travel document.
See the cover?
And this is the travel document.